Well, welcome everybody. I'm Eric Morcheski, one of your co-hosts for Be Nimble. And joining me as my other co-host here is Dion Brown, the Managing Director of Nonprofit Services for Nimble Strategies. And today we had two guests lined up, Bill Haley and Dr. Suzanne McLeod. Unfortunately, Dr. McLeod is not able to join us, but I promise Bill Haley will do a great job of talking through accessibility for all. Some of the actions that have been taken, actions that still can be taken to really improve things, and even just now talking through some of those technologies that may allow us to better improve our environments so that all people have access to the best possible environment and an equal experience across an environment. Bill Haley, if you don't know him, is one of the founders of Haley Sharpe Design out of Leicester, England, and has become a friend of mine after we got to work together on the Gateway Arch National Park project. Did a fantastic job with the new museum there, really has built an environment that people just keep coming back to and enjoying themselves. And so during that time, I really grew to appreciate him. I often tell people he's not as smart as he sounds, it's just the accent, but anyway, I still have a great appreciation for him nonetheless. I will note to all of our attendees, please feel free to ask questions. There is a Q&A function down on the bottom. There's also a chat feature. Please feel free to use either one of those. We're happy to include your questions as we talk through this subject. This is really just a live chat going on with Bill and Dion and I, so it really should be free flowing, and your questions only improve that. With that said, I mentioned that Bill and I had the good fortune of working at the Arch. Bill, take us through what happened at the Arch and how accessibility was such a critical piece to improving the design of what was there.
Okay, hello there, everybody. I'll try to speak with American accent if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. We started in 2011 on the St. Louis project, and I've always felt that accessibility was a good thing to do. But the St. Louis project brought us to a new level of understanding of what it really means to be accessible. And very early on, we had one or two of these very large meetings where everybody sits in a room and what we're doing, how we're going to do it, where's it going to go, how, what do we need to do? And it lasted 4 days. And at the end of it, I was taken aside by David Newberger, who is the St. Louis representative who looks after accessibility for the whole city. And he sort of said, well, you didn't mention accessibility very much, and I'm going to keep my eye on you. I'm going to make sure that you do the right things. And I thought, oh, okay, how painful is this going to be? Because that was the natural reaction. In actual fact, it was one of the most enlightening periods and projects I've ever worked on. He set up what they called the Universal Design Group team. And that consisted of 27 groups of people with various forms of disability, from autism, from being partially sighted, being blind, hard of hearing, or you name it, they had this. And he felt that we should be speaking to them every time we were in town for a meeting, which was essentially every month. We would come to St. Louis every month for a week. And we took time to work through them, to listen to them and what they had to say. He said that his role was to help mediate between all those 27 different disability groups. And long story short, we did that for 6 years, taking every time we made a presentation about where the design had got, where the interpretive planning had got to, we were asked to present that to this group. Now, just the presentation of it to that group started us to think, well, how do we do this? How if you're partially sighted or you can't see, how do you see plans? How do you see visuals? So we had to work out new ways of doing that. We used to make models of everything or plans. as it got on, we used 3D printing of their plans, and it's very cheap and very easy to do that. But even that, you've got to try and explain to this very wide range of groups of people what they're looking at and what they're feeling. So on the one hand, people looking at the screen at one end of the room, and the other end of the screen room, the people feeling plans. And so you can't just say point to things. You have to say, now to the top left. I mean, these might be obvious things to everybody what I'm saying, but it was really important that we built a rapport and understanding. And it was our job to find out what they felt about things and to listen hard about what was coming back to us. This went through every single phase of the project right the way through. And we would come up usually with 4 or 5 questions prior to the meeting so that they could be sent to everybody in the group. So they knew we were going to be thinking about these things. And then we would present at where we were in our thinking at each group. That went right the way through all the usual processes of building an exhibit and museum space, till we got to the fabrication and the start of that. And what we built into the fabricator's contract was that he had to provide a facility 1 mile from the arch that everybody could, from the 27 different groups, could go and see at regular intervals prototypes. So it wasn't just lip service and we'd done a set of drawings and it'd be all right in the night. They wanted to be totally and utterly involved. And so we had, normally on a project of this scale, you might do 7, 10, perhaps 15 different prototypes of various aspects, types of cases, types of wall finishes. But we did 78 on this project, and they approved and made comment on all of them. The angles of screens, the how far can you reach, how much of a touch screen, and touch screens are going to be tricky in the future, but how far in a touch screen can you really move to? And what it did, it allowed everybody to have an involvement and engagement with the project. It was not just being, well, we consulted people who've got accessibility issues, therefore it's all right, or we'll do as best we can and it'll be all right on the night. No, that was never good enough. It had to be. It was helped in 2015 by the Park Service director of the whole of the Park Service saying, and it was known as the director's memo, and he used the phrase all in, and he said that everybody had the same experience at the same time for everybody, and it was all in. And so it was very broad, it was very encouraging people to discuss. Going back a step, what this built on was universal design principles, and I don't know how much who's listening to me in with my accent, how much they know about the universal design principles, but they were developed by North Carolina University in 1997, and they set out quite simple and obvious things about making it equitable use, making it intuitive, the things you do, creating space for people to work within. And I don't have all the things in front of me, and I can't remember the whole 7, but we built on that, and then the accessibility process through the Universal Design Group helped a lot. It was really an extension of, it was a practical extension of the Universal Design Group. I have to also say that the architecture was the same as well. The architects didn't escape the process. And one of the good things about the whole thing was not only was the visitors made to be everything accessible, so was the users, so was the organizers, the Park Service staff. Everybody had to be, regardless of ability, had to be able to get into each of the areas. It's a statistical fact that 19.7%, and 19.7% of the population of the US and Europe has some form of disability. And so therefore, do you ignore that? Say 20, call it 20, a fifth of your population has some, and you can't just sort of, well, we'll do our best. You're ignoring 20% of your catchment. And the spend value of that group of people, which is not always the right thing to think about as you're doing it, but it is important, is huge. And the more you say you're making things flexible and accessible, the more likely you are to get people to come there. If you say you're fully accessible, then you can do all these things. The visitors show that they do engage and they do come, and there's an increase in them. So that's a very quick run through of how we did it. I'm sure there must be questions or comments.
I think what's done right here is a lot of times architects, designers retrofit their design to meet guidelines, not necessarily to do what is right or what should be done, but to meet ADA guidelines. What was different here with the Arch is we made this an inclusive environment. We said, we want you here. Like you said, we were meeting with them monthly, once a month to once every 6 weeks, bringing them in to say, what do we need to change here? How does this work? We weren't telling someone who was blind, this is going to be what's working for you. We were bringing in someone who was blind and telling us, how do we get this to be the best experience for you? And that's really what made it equal across the bounds. And perhaps the entrance to me is the best example, and it's on the architecture side more than the design side. But originally the entrance was designed differently. And when it was being designed, it was a beautiful new entrance to the Arch, and people were really excited about it. And our universal design group said, well, but this isn't wheelchair accessible, this main entrance. And the architect said, well, but this is the wheelchair entrance over here. And the principle of it was always, we were not going to be separate but equal. We were going to be universally accessible to all. And I think that's really what was a game changer for how this was thought. One, these people were, with all different types of abilities, were coming in and telling us how to do this the right way from the beginning. And two, we were not trying to create an environment that gave them a similar experience. We were providing an experience that everyone had access to. And I think the results speak for themselves. You and I have talked about this a lot, Bill. The tactiles are used by everyone. The tactiles, I've never seen a kid not go up and touch all the tactiles in there, because what kid doesn't want to put their hands on everything? You go through museums your whole life being told don't touch, and then all of a sudden you've got this museum that's not only has this amazing history to it and all these great stories out of it, but you're told go touch these things and go put your hands on it. And it really does improve the user experience for all. And that's, I think, one of the key things that we got out of the Universal Design Group, is that we did improve the experience for everyone.
And during the process, we had to build that level of trust with all those groups, because a lot of them have been disappointed in the past. That old thing about consultation fatigue. You ask these questions, you ignore us, and then you come back. So we had to build that up, and I felt that was incredibly important, that we weren't just lip servicing and ticking a box. It was, we have listened, we think this is right, how do we do it? And that really got them all excited and things. They went forward.
Dion, I see you typing questions to us as opposed to just asking us.
That's okay.
There's noise in the background, I think. So Dion was trying to ask, his question is, were we successful in accommodating all the groups, or did we receive feedback, of people feeling left out? And I mean, I would say there are probably a couple answers in there, and I would say there's always an opportunity to do better.
Mhm.
There's nothing that's perfect, but I think one of the things that made things accessible to accommodations was the fact that because we had included these groups from the beginning, they felt like this was their story to tell as well. And so they understood, just like the design team or the architecture team understood when we had to make accommodations for a budget discrepancy or whatever it might be, the Universal Design Group, because they had owned this process from the beginning, was willing to make accommodations along the way. I would say the other thing that we found is we're retrofitting a national park site that was designated a national park site in the 1930s, was built in the 1960s, and the building space inside then was renovated, and the museum was built in the 1970s originally. And so there were certain pieces like handicap parking within, certain distance of the new entrance that there wasn't a space for us to put new parking spaces for someone. But we did work out parking spaces as close as possible and much closer than they were historically. And so when we would get asked a question about that parking or something, the head of the Universal Design Group, as Bill mentioned, David Newberger, was the first one out there to explain why it was like it was. It wasn't that I stood up and said, this was the best we could do. It was David Newberger in a wheelchair saying, here's why we're in this situation. This was the best possible answer we could hope for at this point. And so it really, I think, changed a media inquiry about, was this working, quite a bit when it was coming directly from the Universal Design Group as a response, as opposed to Bill or myself.
Yeah, that's so important. That ownership of the project and being listened to. I think that's I use listening all the time. I think we don't often listen hard enough to teams we work with and clients we work with, but it's so important. It's an easy thing to say, harder to do.
And the Park Service, to their credit, I mean, they did say all in, but they also had certain things that they said, this is a historical aspect of the space. You can't change this. It is not accessible for a wheelchair to go to the top of the arch. It's barely accessible for someone above 6'3", maybe, to go to the top of the arch because of the size of the pods. But it is 100% not accessible for someone in a wheelchair. We were told that the arch was considered a historical, those pods that you went up in were considered a historical feature, and they were a protected aspect of it. And so, again, I think had we not had a very inclusive experience, a Universal Design Group coming in after the fact may have pressed harder on something like that. But because it was inclusive throughout, I think we had built enough of a rapport that we didn't get a pushback to that as much as we got, we'd like you to do as much as you possibly can. So, I mean, there definitely were accommodations made along the way, but they were made in coordination with our Universal Design team.
But we started to think about, as we were doing this, how could we give the visitor an experience of going up there when they couldn't get into the things? So we took the arches built, both legs were built. So I'll wave my arms up in here. They both built together, and the keystone was dropped in at the top. So we literally dropped a keystone right into the main gallery space below. The section of is constructed in the same way as it was at the top. And we did the footage and access from what you would see if you went up there. So you could actually get access to real-time views from the top. So again, it was all part of that. How can we do something that's almost impossible? And it all helped. And it's used by people who don't go up. I mean, something like 40% of the visitors going there don't go up the arch. They just come, they take people to go up the arch. And sometimes they don't like to get in there. They feel claustrophobic and all 101 reasons. So, but they use that keystone we put in the central space as a very useful tool. Tool.
And again, I think that goes back to our Universal Design Group providing a better experience because we made it an inclusive environment, and that keystone, like you noted, I can't tell you how many people said I'm claustrophobic. There's no way I'm getting in one of those pods.
Yeah.
But the keystone exhibit with the feed showing what the view is out of both sides of the arch allowed someone who was in a wheelchair or someone who was claustrophobic or couldn't get a ticket because it was sold out that day to receive the views out of the top of the arch. And so that was a really important aspect that continuously improved the visitor experience for all. And the other thing you touched on a little bit there, Bill, was the economic side of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that was really through my thought process, being accounting and finance background, the economics always are important from my perspective. But keeping it inclusive from the beginning, I think what it did was we weren't going back and redesigning. We weren't going back and rebuilding something after the fact. So it was actually done in the schedule, and that actually probably saved us money on the back end from retrofitting items that were being fabricated and then saying, well, that doesn't quite work. You know, we had Pacific Studios out there showing these people from the Universal Design Group what this would actually feel like, what it would look like. And they were able to give us real-time feedback that prevented us from having to go back and fix things after the fact.
Yeah, no, that's very, and again, it goes back to that. And I don't know how you put a monetary value on it. The whole experience was enhanced for everybody because they could touch. Every single case had a tactile. There were just more than anywhere else we've ever done, worked on, and I think I enjoyed it because I go around and just stroke these things and talk. Now, I think that throws up a whole range of new questions as we move into this period we're in now with the pandemic. How do we get over these issues? But I think if you think about universal design, it's just got another layer of issues to deal with. It was always there. Perhaps I'm jumping ahead, Eric, here.
No, there is no script, so go for it.
But moving, there's been a lot of effort in the last 10, 15 years with digital design and immersive design and all these things. And while on the one hand, it's great for telling broader and wider stories and multiple perspectives on the same events through digital media, you're making more barriers for people who have accessibility issues. That was a point that hit me hard when I was going through it. They all described the process of what we were doing was removing barriers from somebody engaging with an object or an artifact or an experience. And just thinking about that, we wouldn't expect barriers if I mean, I've got some sight problems, but normally I'm okay to go through it. But if someone put a barrier in front of it, I would want it taken away. That's what people who have accessibility issues need us to think about. How do we remove as many of these barriers as we can? But going forward, I think we're in an amazing period, and this is where universal design is going to be more important to really embrace how do you do immersive, digitally projected immersive experiences that are accessible for all? It's an open question. I don't know. We were talking beforehand as well. How do we make touching acceptable? And we were talking about UVC light sources that sort of eradicate these things. Do we build these things? There's lots of new things going forward. I'm perhaps just drifting off into the future rather than the present. But the future's here. I mean, how are we going to change these things and do these things?
Well, and you brought up a good point. I mean, right now, nobody wants to go use touch screens, right? Yet
No.
touch screens are what everyone's been installing for the last 10 years in every museum across the country and around the world. And so, I think one of the things that we brought up yesterday when we were discussing things was, does the pandemic that's going on around the world help or hinder improving accessibility? And I think there are pieces of this that say we can accelerate some accessibility features into these spaces. And then there's also going to be some of these issues like UVC lighting or whatever other features need to be installed so that people can feel safe in a space.
Yeah.
That may set us back in accessibility. And so what do we need to do to make sure that museums, parks, cultural institutions don't take a step backwards because we haven't made enough steps forwards?
Yeah, no, I think we've got to address all these things. And I think we have to think much wider. One of the things we did at that isn't very obvious when you go around it, because it looks like an exhibit you'd expect, but we put in an incredibly complex soundscape throughout the whole experience. So wherever you are, you got a feeling of a different. I'm out in the open, I'm inside, I'm in the French Quarter, and it was quite subtle. And because of the way we can position speakers and things these days, we can make it not a very noisy experience. So that added to it, and which reminded me of a thing we did. We did a test piece, but we didn't actually do it a few years ago, where it was for a maritime museum, and most people had never been to sea or never been on a boat that's rocked about. So we created as a like a prototype a box which had 4 seats in it, but no light. And the idea was to sort of use sound to try and evoke being at sea and movement. And a number of people that came out and said, well, how did you get the motion platform working? Well, we didn't. There was no motion platform. Your mind was, because the sounds were rolling around in the space you're in, made you feel as though you were on a boat. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity using sound and light to, well, sound for some, light for others, to make immersion work in different ways.
Yeah. We did get a question from our audience, and what are some of the museums that you feel are doing a really good job at accessibility? What are you seeing them doing that's better than others, and where are those? Are there certain? I mean, you've worked around the world on museums from. I know you have offices in South Africa, in Toronto, and in England. You've worked in a lot of different areas. So are there areas you're seeing of the world that are doing better at it? And if so, what are they doing better and why are they doing better at this?
I think a lot of Dutch art galleries and are doing a lot with programming in terms of creating experiences for people with Alzheimer's or people with aphasia or other issues, and creating 3-dimensional paintings that can touch. Again, we've got the other issue now of touching. So I think that the Dutch are doing a lot of good stuff. I think St. Louis is pretty good. I think a lot of park services in the last 5 years are having the same impact and input going forward. We did one for them at, in Maryland at Harriet Tubman's birthplace, and we used the same techniques of touching, sound, the way you read things and do things in there. But no, I think the Dutch, some of the UK work, I think everybody's doing quite a lot, but they're not doing all of it. Everybody could do more. I mean, I'm saying St. Louis is a good one. It is a good one, but we could still do more, and we could still change things and revisit the things. And one of the things I haven't done, but would be good to do, is go around with David Newberger now and say, well, okay, how do we move it forward? I'm just trying to think where else. Yeah, Holland. I mean, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam is pretty good at that sort of stuff. But a lot of it is to do with programming and the way they do it, and creating spaces. I mean, you've got spaces. We created spaces in St. Louis for people with autism, you know, as shelters, you know, to get away from it. A lot of museums now are using the building management system to set 5 or 6 different levels of the whole space, where you can, you know, we're having an autism evening and you press the button and all the lights change, all the content, sounds, things all go down a notch or two. But the same for Alzheimer's and things like that. I like these things, people in care homes who take, and I think this is in Amsterdam, use a robot. So you can sit in your chair in a care home and control a robot that takes you around exhibits, and you can look at what they are, and you can control where they're looking. I mean, it's an interesting way of trying things. I think a lot of people are trying to do things. We're working on it, and I said it earlier, a company that's looking at gesture recognition and facial recognition and color recognition, so that if you don't want to touch, you could possibly use a touch screen and look at it and wave a hand or do a certain gestures rather than touch things. So I think all those things are coming forward.
Yeah, and you talked about programming, and I think you were speaking more of the programming of exhibits, but when we were talking yesterday, Dion and I were talking to you about incorporating the principles of that design beyond the physical space. And so what we were talking about was, when we started putting on Blues at the Arch, we pulled those principles through and kept them going. And so whether that was fonts and colors for someone with visual impairments, but also that even as a blues musician was playing, there was someone doing sign language up on stage, so that someone with a hearing impairment could understand what was going on. And I mean, to me, I was always so amazed, because we had 2 signers at everyone, because there was so much energy coming out of these people when they were signing the music, that they needed a break in between songs. But I mean, they created a better environment by having those people there and watching these signers up on stage, just, you know, really relaying the energy of the music to someone who couldn't hear. But also for those of us that could hear it, we were able to, you know, see the energy coming from them, and really building the energy of the whole space and everyone in the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, it's things like having surfaces that accentuate the reverberation of music, so you can feel, you know, we all go to a concert and stuff, and you get blown away sometimes with just physical things, but finding surfaces that vibrate at the paces is something to look at. There's a Oxford University are looking at controlling mechanical things by brain waves. So you essentially you can look at an object in a case and you could think, I want to see the other side, and it will turn around. And they're not far away from that. Samsung are doing haptic surfaces on their cell phones, so that it's not open to the ready for the public yet, but it's getting close. That you can touch Braille, you could touch the surface of things on your cell phone without seeing it. I mean, I just think there are so many new things that are around the corner to help as well. It's amazing time.
It is important, and I do think it's important for the spaces, whether it's a museum, a park, or whatever, to remember it can't stop once you build it, right? It has to be inclusive in your programming. It has to be inclusive in everything you do, and you have to live and breathe it, and you have to accept that your pushback at sometimes to say you're not doing well enough, and that can't be heard as a negative. That has to be seen as an opportunity to improve what you're doing. And if you take it in that way, I do think you'll find the community really embraces what you're doing.
I think it's worth saying as well that we design and work on heritage sites, landscapes. We're doing Oman botanical gardens, all sorts of things. The principles are exactly the same. And what I've been doing a lot recently is going around universities and art schools and colleges, getting the young designers to think that this is the normal thing to do all the time. You know, why wouldn't you? And I'm getting good response from them. Still got to see it when they get out into the wild world and there's a financial director saying, no, you can't do that. And there's still those barriers there. I mean, everybody wants to do it, but everything the thing I wish I could wave a magic wand and say that it's not going to cost you any more, or if it does, it's worth doing. All financial directors, sorry, Eric, want to control it, and they think it's a way of cutting it. We'll cut down on the accessibility. Wrong. You're cutting down your audience by 20% if you don't do it.
Hey, Bill, this is Dion. Excuse me, Eric. Can you speak to you mentioned us, you told us yesterday when we were speaking about a story that impacted you, and I think it happened 15 to 20 years ago, working at Hampton University or speaking.
Yeah. Well, thanks for reminding me of that, because I think it's really important, because along with accessibility, I'm thinking about EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion. And the first real big, large project we did in the US was at Jamestown. And when we were there, at one of the early meetings there, the director of architecture from Hampton University listened to it all, said, you know, get you, understand it. But then he took me aside and said, just think about this. And it wasn't making me feel small or anything. He just sort of said, think about this. He said, if you think that a graphic panel on a wall is a white construct and a method of getting information across, that isn't all the same for everyone. And so that was nearly 20 years ago, but it was 20 years ago. And it's always made me think since then, what is the best way of telling a story? Is it orally? Is it listening to people? Is it engaging people? Is it asking them questions? Never, you know, it's ever so easy in the past to say the empirical story is this happened and this happened and everybody had the same end result. No, that's not true. And so that was a really important moment for me, because every time I start picking the pen up again now, I think about, well, should we be doing something different? Should we be, in actual fact, I remembered it so well that when we worked on the Harriet Tubman, we created a fire pit around where the stories could be told by the education departments to people as they sat around and looking at the stars above them, because that's how she imparted information. I had a long discussion one day. We had all the historians there, and someone described Harriet Tubman as an illiterate woman. Well, that took a whole day to discuss what they meant by that, and how could she do all the things she did and become such a voice in that period without being literate in different ways. I mean, she could take people through. She understood the landscape. She could read the landscape. She could read people. She could communicate her ideas to people. And so that was a really brilliant one day discussion about someone, and it was an academic who was trying to get a point across, but it went on for the whole day to work out. Sorry, I'm drifting away from your.
No, thank you. You hit it.
You know,
but it goes down to listening.
I think talking about Jamestown, talking about Harriet Tubman or the Arch, you know, I think sometimes people struggle when they can't understand the difference between a new build to what they should be doing on a daily basis. When their environment is already built for them, you know, whether it's a museum or whether it's a park space that maybe they're coming in as an executive director or, you know, whatever it might be, you know, what are those things that you're seeing can be done that can improve the space with that when it's not, you know, being built from the ground up?
I use the expression walking and talking, because I think there's nothing better than having someone with an open mind to walk around the site and really look at it from the eyes of a visitor. I would ask the visitors what they think about their, set up a group. It might be an advisory group, and it might be a UDG group. You know, how do we improve that? You know, they know they perhaps haven't got the money, but you won't know what people think about it. And I know it sounds obvious, unless you ask people and bring them to the table and listen to them. There's lots of new things going on, and a lot of the new things, because of the pandemic, are going to change the way people use museums. There's a lot of work being discussed about space. I mean, how much space do you need now? If you are going to social distance for the next 2 years, say, you know, how's it going to restrict the numbers? How do you do that? But it's just going back. The best friend, the cheapest friend to a designer and a client is lighting. You can do so much with lighting to structures and things you've already got. So have an open mind about how you develop lighting, how you work with lighting. Surfaces, touching, how do you do it? What do you do? It depends on where you are, but I would walk around with a group of people you value their opinion, and you might set it up as an accessibility group or a UDG group. I prefer the UDG group because it's a bigger, broader group, and it might be you just go around and change all the graphics to a bigger point size. We had that issue. I don't know if you remember that one. There was an edict that said you had to have 36-point captions in labels. So we put some in there, and you couldn't see the object for the label. And then someone of the UDG group said, well, I'm partially sighted, and I don't care what size you do it, but I've got to hold it 3 inches from my face to read it. So we put them at the side of every label. There was a removable one you could put 3 inches from your face. And that only came about because someone said do that, but not do that. The ADA guidelines, really, that's part of the issue as well. And you interpret it the best way you can. It's but again, I still think the best inputs usually come from listening to people and how people use the spaces.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice to, you know, walk through the space with someone and solicit their feedback hands-on. And I mean, I don't think there's anything that replaces that, right? There's,
it's so important.
yeah, it's maybe harder to do right now during the pandemic, but
Yeah, but
especially in
two or
parts
three
of
people, yeah.
yeah,
But it means you talk, it's ever so easy. You end up in these rooms with plans and you forget the space. And to be frank, most clients don't really understand the space and the drawings they're shown. It's better to mark it out, go on site, walk through things than it is to sort of try and do it on computer and generated visuals and things which all look great. But what's the reality of it? Oh, I've only got 12 inches and I've got to squeeze through that. Well, the visual can make it look great.
yeah. Yeah. So, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. We welcome some questions from our audience as well. I don't know, Bill, if there's kind of anything that you're kind of thinking needs to get said. I know we've kind of talked through a number of items here. How do you see universal design being better embraced? Are there steps that we need to take as we move forward as a society to better embrace these universal design concepts?
I think so. I think
or what are the issues?
No, I think it's really important how understanding those universal design principles. And when the director of the Park Service said all in, I think that's the big clue. How do you make it work for everybody? Mm-hmm. And the idea of that every impairment there's a series of barriers. Remove them. How do you take them away? I think it's going to be crucial. I think also, I said the other day that EDI is really important now because we're looking at what the content is, what stories we're going to be telling. So this is a refreshing time it's the real opportunity to look at what you have and how you take what you have to where it needs to go and embrace all these issues of Black Lives Matter, inclusivity, equality. How do you get those across? And it's not by the ways we've been doing it in the past. There's a study going on in the UK about the text it's the National Museum, and I won't say which one it is. They're looking at all the things they've written over the past 10 to 15 years, and they're looking at the color of it. And I mean the color, the skin color. Is it too white in the way it uses language to get across the messages to these very wide, diverse audiences? And I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know what's going to come out of that. But I think it's making us all think hard about, well, what's the best way? It goes back to what Dion asked me to reminded me about the head of the architecture school. Think about the best way of telling these stories, because that's what we do, isn't it? Really, I mean, whether we're walking in a park or we're trying to find out things and find information, how do we get it? It's too easy to sort of just look, Google it or look up things or go for the easy, quick answer. You've got to look at what's the special qualities about each institution or each building or each site and client. I'm just looking. I had my list here. I think COVID is making us think hard about technology as well. I was getting a feeling in the last 5 years that technology is 20 years ago, most clients would say, we don't do technology because it breaks down. The last 10 years, people have accepted that it doesn't really, that's just a thing. I think technology, though, can be an answer to a lot of things, but if it can make it accessible, how do you? I mean, we've all seen these Van Gogh exhibitions that are total paintings all wrapped around you, and you walk through experienced places. How does someone who's partially sighted get an experience there? the default is give them an audio description or someone to talk to them as they walk them through and touch things. But you just need to be put your feet in someone else's shoes for a while and walk around these things. Space is going to be a new thing that we are, you know, architects building new things are thinking about space. One of the things we had to do when we were doing the St. Louis project was we couldn't just say, yes, we can, all wheelchairs can go in, get their feet underneath, the wheels underneath the unit. We had to show it. We had to prove it. You know, and that was to do with that trust thing. At the beginning, everybody tells us we get access to it, and when we get on site, we can't. So I think building trust and working through things is really important.
I think, you know, as you talk through, you know, whether it's DEI, whether it's accessibility for universal design, or even just the Park Service, I mean, inclusion and trust kind of are the recurring themes to those, right? When we came in initially and told the Park Service we were going to do a $380 million renovation of the park space, we were going to raise $250 million in private funding. They were like, yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, we'll see you when you get it.
Yeah. Call us when you're ready to give us the check. You know, and yeah, we went through this design process and we were still going through that fundraising and all of those things. And so there was a little bit of like, what are we doing this for? Because you're not going to raise $380 million. Like, that's not going to happen. And yet when we did, then it was like, okay, like, wow. You know, we've got to pivot a little bit, but there was an inclusive part the whole time, but there wasn't quite the trust there, right? It wasn't anything personal. It was just, there wasn't a trust between the groups to say like, they're really going to pull this off. You know, when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, like the same thing holds true. You know, you need to be inclusive. You need to make sure that the voices are being heard, and that's going to build the trust.
Yeah.
Over time. Like, it's not an immediate thing ever.
No, that's right. Yeah.
You know, and so the same thing was true for our accessibility team and the Universal Design Group. Was we had to build the trust through inclusion. And so, I mean, I think that's the resounding thing as I kind of even just listened to this discussion today is, you know, inclusion building trust is the magical magical solution to all of this.
And it happens so often in so many projects. I worked on Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka probably about 15 years ago. And the head of the NAACP lost it with me. We're in a big meeting, there's about 40 in the room, and we were going through the process of the Park Service process. And she essentially rounded on me and said, what do you, a white middle-aged Englishman, know about anything we want to do? And of course, everybody in the room looks the other way and leads me to it. And I said, I tell your stories. That's all I can do. I'm a storyteller, but I'm a storyteller of other people's stories. And it was a good way for me to understand how people got it. And she was very angry. And she was angry. I just happened to be the one she took it out on, because she didn't understand the process either. She didn't understand that this is a step in the process. No one thought to tell her about the process. So I think, because these are complicated projects, or can be, but even a straightforward review of what you've got going, you need to bring the people you're asking along with you as well, and why you ask him and why you bring him to the table. At the opening, we're great friends, because she understood at the end I was going through a process that got us to there. My fault and the others on our team was that we hadn't explained it well enough to our audience, so there was no real trust there, you know. So I just got blasted. But it happens all the time. If you don't help the client understand, help your team, you've got to be on the same page. You've got to be going the same way. Sorry, I can't talk.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to share?
I wrote down the last thing. Where's it gone? This simple phrase captures the all-in thing for me, that at the end of it, the equality of experience, it's an equality of experience for all, comparably and simultaneously, regardless of ability. And that's got to be the way, what it means. No one should have a different one. Like you said about where the people who are disabled go down the bit stairs at the back and come out at a different an angle, and they miss the whole purpose of what's going on. It's the same all the way through. And I think we just need to add the EDI. I've been trying to persuade people over here to use, instead of EDI, with accessibility is threaded through. If you made it idea, so you just change the order. So you got a new idea, which is inclusivity, diversity, equality, and accessibility as the thing. So think of ideas as the way forward.
I like it. Dion, any parting words of wisdom?
No parting words, but I just wanted to make a comment to Bill. Bill, thank you. I mean, you opened my eyes again on different areas. I wish we had a little bit more time, because I think I heard you reference, is it David Neuberger?
David Neuberger, yeah.
Yeah, and I got a little bit of him yesterday, but I didn't get the full relationship and how he plays an impact. But
he's brilliant. He did a video for us, and I'll share that with you both. Okay. Of the experience with St. Louis, and he videoed it outside the museum and went through things and talked about it. But no, he's definitely someone, as you're in St. Louis, is someone to go and see, and he wants to, he'll hold you to account, but he's also wants to help.
Yeah.
And he's great on advice and things.
Well, on my behalf, for me, thank you for taking time out of your day and educating myself and our audience.
Well, not just sharing, it's part of that, share and enjoy.
There you go.
So thank you so much, Bill. Thanks, Dion. I will also throw out on March 23rd, our next Be Nimble show is Public Art for the Public Good, where we have Scott Stewart, Executive Director of Millennium Park, joining us, and Lauren Ross, the Executive Director of Laumeyer Sculpture Garden, joining us to talk through how public art can be utilized properly throughout the public spaces, but also, what are the opportunities within public art across public spaces. And so it should be a really fun discussion. Scott is a close friend, and Lauren is someone that I've known for years now, and I'm confident you'll gain a lot on the public art process and their thoughts to it. So please keep that in mind and join us on March 23rd. And in the meantime, thank you again, Bill, for joining us. This was a really fun discussion.
Yes.
Okay. If anybody's got any questions, just relay them through Eric, and I'm happy to answer anything.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.